Europe. From the outside, it looks like a peaceful nation with lively people and a lively culture. But this suspected peace does not come without a cost. Many wars were fought between these nations and with surrounding nations, with years and years of painful history. But throughout this documentary, we will discuss this painful history and how it affects them then and how it affects us now. The United States and Europe have many different cultural differences, and that affects the way we interact with them. There's some small differences, such as in Europe, they mainly drive manual vehicles. In the United States, we drive automatic vehicles. But there are things much larger than that as well, such as in the United States, we have a congressional government and they have a parliament. There's other small things too, like how we use the English imperial system and they use the metric system. But all of these things go hand in hand with the way we interact with them. For example, in Europe, they have a very lax government system on things such as soft drugs and prostitution, while in the United States, we have much harsher regulations on those things. So when someone comes from Europe to the United States, or the other way around, interacting with those people can be different because of the different government systems and cultural systems that we've grown up with. And because of that, there's many different ways that we interact with them for those specific reasons. The history of Europe affects the way we interact with them today for many different reasons, most of those being the cause of the war started from Europe. World War I and World War II were both detrimental on the world as a whole, and because of that, the United States interacts with them differently today, as to prevent one of those wars from happening ever again. For example, World War II, the United States tried to stay out of it, tried to no real pushback against Hitler and his regime, up until Pearl Harbor when it attacked our own soil. From then we jumped in and caused both Germany and the Japanese to surrender, thus ending World War II. Now, because of this, we don't want another world war to happen ever again, so our interactions with countries in Europe as a whole has changed massively because we want to prevent these things from happening ever again. We don't want another war. We don't want more millions and millions of people to die, so we interact with our governments in specific ways to build treaties, to build trust, so there is no more wars. The rise and fall of things like the Roman Empire throughout Europe also had massive effects, as the control of things like straits in Europe changed, as the control of the straits were extremely key in those times, and still today, as controlling waterways and straits of that such are key for things like trade. Another event that had massive effects on Europe history was the Dark Ages, where there was extremely little development throughout Europe, with a suppression of new ideas and new science discoveries in Europe. Also, the control of the church throughout Europe led to a suppression of new ideas, as they pushed only specific ways to get into heaven, and no change was made to things like their Bible and scriptures, as they did not translate this Bible from the Latin language to make their people still try and go back to their history. This led to no development there and no development overall in Europe as a society. All these things changed the way that Europe governments run and Europe society, and because of that, this changes the way our government interacts with them throughout time. Obviously, the way our government interacts with them now is different than in the past, but overall, throughout the study changes, and just the progress that's been made in Europe from these times has led to a different change and different mindset that our government has towards theirs. Conflict with the outside world has shaped the region of Europe in many different ways, specifically the political region. As I talked about in the last part, World War I and World War II had massive effects on the entire world as a whole and the way we live. And because of this, political regions have changed. For example, Germany and their build from different types of governments, and also places like Russia, an extreme communist nation, now trying to move in past years to a democratic nation. And just all these different countries working in different ways just to build their own political regions because of their effects with other nations. So in World War II, when Germany was fighting with other nations to regain control of them, and there was no pushback from the World War I, and just the effect that World War I was known as the war to end all wars. So the fact that there could have been another one potentially, there was no pushback on Hitler and his regime. So this was kept going on and on and on until it was something that exploded, and there was just this giant World War II. And because of that, all these nations affected their political regions just because the arguing, the fighting, it changed them because they don't want another world war or any war in general to happen ever again. Now, after the last two questions discussed history and mainly the fighting between Europe and other nations, this next one will talk about important events in Europe that have had the greatest global impact. So, obviously, starting on a heavy note, one of the things that have had the greatest global impact is the effect of immigration. As is known, countries in the Middle East have had many people immigrating and trying to get out of the Middle East, such as places like in Syria, where there's civil wars going on for years and years. Now, the United States has had a tough stance on this, not allowing many immigrants in, while different nations in Europe have had an opposite effect. They've had very lax laws on letting immigrants in and letting mass amounts of them in. So in places like Germany, the United Kingdom, and Switzerland, or Sweden, they've had massive terrorist attacks and bombings, attacks in general from people of these immigrant nations who have caused a lot of detriment and a lot of harm to them and have just been bad for their countries as a whole. Now, moving on to a lighter note, another thing that has greatest global impact in Europe is fashion. A lot of the new fashion trends and things come from countries in Europe, and big countries, Italy, France, those two countries especially, are very known and have been known for years to come up with new fashion ideas and new projects, and eventually those things move to us in the United States and all across the world in general, and that's one of the things that has a great global impact.